For 21 years, the East Coast Electorate of Ikaroa-Rāwhiti has been a Labour Party stronghold, represented for 7 years by Meka Whaitiri. Now, a new challenger, the Māori Party's Heather Te Au-Skipworth, has entered the race. But could the Greens' Elizabeth Kerekere come through the middle to put them both at the post? He taupatu nui kei te haere, kei te mātakitaki koutou I a te hui. Pōti, rua te kau, rua te kau. Karahui hui mai, I'm Mihi Ngarangi Forbes, and tonight the leading candidates in the Ikaroa-Rāwhiti clash and the fourth of our Māori electorate debates. Now, so far this year, more than 35,500 Māori have registered to vote in Ikaroa-Rāwhiti, and in 2017, 67.4% of registered voters headed to the polls. So how are our candidates going to convince them to vote? Let's meet them now. They are Labour Party MP Meka Whaitiri, the Greens' Elizabeth Kerekere, and of course the Māori Party's Heather Te Au-Skipworth. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora.
I'm going to start by asking each of you for your opening statements. Kei a koe te wā, Meka.
E te iwi tēnā koutou. Ko Meka Whaitiri tōku ingoa, he uri ahau o te Ikaroa-Rāwhiti, nā te kahungunu me rangitāne hoki. Good evening, my name is Meka Whaitiri and I'm the Labour candidate for Ikaroa-Rāwhiti. I share whakapapa through to the four iwi of Ikaroa-Rāwhiti, nā te kahungunu and rangitāne. This year I'm asking for your candidate vote and your party vote. Why? Because Labour has a plan. We've started implementing a plan. The numerous inequalities Māori are facing in health, housing, education and employment. It's a plan informed by our strong 30 members of the Māori caucus. We've implemented and we've started it, huge record investments, $1.4 billion in the last two budgets. But we've done it in partnership with iwi and Māori providers. It's a start, but we know more can be done. So this year, I'm asking to vote Meka Whaitiri and Labour, and let's keep moving.
Tēnā koe, kei a koe, Elizabeth.
Kia ora koutou katoa, he mokopuna huki ahu o te Ikaroa-Rāwhiti. Ko whānau ākai, ko Ngāti Onione, ko te aitanga māhaki, ko rongo whakaata, me ngai tāmanuhiri oku nei iwi. That's on my father's side. On my mother's side, I hail from County Clare and County Tipperary in Ireland. I think about how change happens in this world. It happens inside our whānau, in our communities, in our organisations, and a certain type of change can only happen in Parliament. Let's not delude ourselves that that's going to be the source of how we're going to gain tino rangatiratanga through the absolute bastion of colonial power. However, I've been somebody who's worked in kaupapa Māori for coming up 40 years, and I have earned these grey hairs. And I'm ready to move into Parliament. Now, tough competition here. If you share my values, then absolutely give me both your votes. However, if you want to share the love, then pick one of these wāhine toa and look at giving your party vote to us, because I like to talk about Māori maths. How about you get the Māoris at the top of our list instead of the non-Māoris at the bottom of somebody else's? Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Heather.
Tēnei au, he mihi tuatahi ki tō tātou nei matua nui te rangi, nō reire pā tēnā koe. Kia koutou kua tai mai I tēnei pō, nō reira tēnā rā tātou katoa. Tēnā koe mihi, tēnā korua, mihi, Meka raua ko Elizabeth. He uri ahau no Ngāti Kahungunu, kai tahu te arawa, tūwhare toa me Ngāti Ruinui. He tunu honori ahau ki te tū I mui a koutou I tēnei pō. I am the creator and the visionary of Iron Māori, and I have seen what change has done to our whānau. 50,000 whānau lives have been changed through the Iron Māori kaupapa. I'm wanting to take that same level of valued kaupapa to Parliament. I'm asking for your candidate vote. I don't want you to risk giving me your party vote, although I'd love that as well. But if you want to see me in Parliament, I need your candidate vote. Kia ora.
Ka pai, very strategic kōrero tonight. Now we ask one of Ikaroa-Rāwhiti's favourite sons to take us into the heart of the electorate to find out what the big issues are for voters in this election. Kia tahurea ki tātou.
East Coast, hearty, naughty, we know how to party.
Kia ora e te hui, nau mai haere mai ki tūranga nui a kiwa ki te uranga mai o te rā, ko Mātai Smith ahau. Well, I'm about to hit the main street of Gizzy to find out what my people think are some of the biggest issues facing us here in Te Tai Rāwhiti. Nō reira, hei aha te makarona, hoa ke tātou, let's go. So what do you think are some of the big issues here in Tūranganui-a-Kiwa, Ikaroa-Rāwhiti?
My personal challenge at the moment is keeping my small business alive. In this small town, I see lots of shops that are empty. We want to keep our economy going so small businesses like me can stay alive too.
Housing and a lot of homeless, eh? Gisborne's a pretty good place. It's full of wonderful people, just the housing would be the biggest problem that we have here.
Oh, where? Kei ia taku iwi.
Well, probably the biggest issues here that we've found working with the community is housing, because we've got a lot of whānau that are in motels, a lot of our single mums and single dads.
Unemployment, like not enough jobs. A lot of it is probably like hours too, not enough hours in the jobs.
The pandemic and losing jobs at the moment, funding going towards better things other than doing the Olympic pools, which is amazing, they really do need it, but there are other things that it could be used for as well.
A lot of young couples just arguing it late at night, and it's frequent, and it becomes so frequent, it's like, you know, listening to birds sing.
So domestic violence is a huge issue here in Tūranga.
That will be the product of, I'm guessing, drugs and substance abuse as well.
Methamphetamine is one of the most greatest dysfunctionalities in our community, from Gisborne right up to State Highway 35. We really got no facility out there to be able to cater for our people who are willing to come off, and you know, we've got nothing there for them. We need that up at the East Coast. We need that in Rotorua.
What's the most important? People, people, people. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata.
We need to save lives, you know, not destroy lives. And I think that's what we're all about here, saving lives. Saving our family, saving our future, saving our history, saving our heritage. A lot of our people don't even know who they are. You know, they're lost.
Nā reira e te hui ki te mātai whakamuri a mātai e toru ngā kaupapa ko puta i te rānei, tuatahi ko te momi pī. So methamphetamine was definitely a major issue here in Tūranganui-a-Kiwa, followed closely by housing and then, of course, unemployment. So, ko te pātai a mātai, what are you going to do about it?
Te pātai a mātai, Elizabeth.
What are we going to do about it? Shout out to the brother Tuta, who is featured there, and his work around meth and supporting our users and our whānau is phenomenal. Of course, a lot of that all voluntary. So for a start, we need to be able to resource our whānau and our community services and organisations to look after our people who are struggling and because of meth abuse, but also the whānau who are wrapping around them to make sure that they're looked after as well. And there are other, when we talk about housing, it's not just that people need a place to live, because they absolutely do, but we need spaces, so residential care for some of our people who are using meth, and you know, they talked about other people who are suffering violence or abuse and other types of things, which meth and other drugs accentuate.
Kia ora. Meka, the government committed $1.9 billion to mental health and addiction services 18 months ago. So I guess the pātai is, where are the facilities?
Yeah, so as the local MP working on the ground, working with our people in the Tai Rāwhiti, particularly around mental health, advocating with the government, we got 15 million out of that 1.5 to actually build a purpose-built mental health and addiction centre at Gisborne Hospital. So that was announced, and that's our commitment as a government. But also the meth. I want to talk about the meth because that is really important. And Manaki Tai Rāwhiti just received, but received $2.8 million from this government to work with whānau with meth. So for me personally, it's getting on the ground, working with those agencies, working with individuals like Tuta.
But is it residential care? Or is it outpatient care? Because what we're hearing here from those people in the rohi and from Elizabeth who's working with it is that we need places to put our addicted whānau
Absolutely.
into.
So it's been a strong point of my advocacy to make sure that's residentially based, simply because we've had no facilities in the Tai Rāwhiti for mental health or addictions for many years, not just when Labour's been in government. So, you know, putting pūtea in where it's needed, addressing issues around mental health and meth addiction is a start that we're committed to doing. But like I said, we've got to do more work.
Ka pai, all up and down the coast, we have this issue. You're closer to Hastings and Ahuriri and those places. How would the Māori Party address addiction?
Well, we just released our health policy saying that $500 million of current mental health funds be transferred directly to Māori. The problem with the current government spend is it's going straight back into the coffers of the government. It's going back into DHBs. That's not where our whānau want to go. And when they do go there, they don't get tended to. They're locked out of the system. We need kaupapa Māori models of care. Mahia Atua are here in Te Ikaroa-Rāwhiti. We have many kaupapa Māori models of care. We have our own systems in tikanga mihi that have stood the test of time. It is our systems that have enabled our survival.
You need it yesterday, so how quickly could the Māori Party roll out this, independent Māori health authority?
Well, if you do the maths, the Māori Party could be the kingmaker. If I get into Parliament and my colleagues, we could be the kingmaker, so there'll be
how quickly could you roll out the health services, the addiction services and stuff?
As fast as the Māori COVID response stood up. When COVID came, Māori, iwi, hapu and providers stood up. We will stand up as fast as that.
How would the Green Party transition, health into kaupapa Māori, health for Māori, by Māori for Māori?
We have many Māori providers, hapu and iwi providers already who have been under-resourced across the country and especially in Arohe. So we want to make sure that our people and our organisations are funded to equivalent standard as their non-Māori colleagues.
Kapai, I want to come back here because I just remembered something you just said then, and I'm going to come back to you, Meka, and give you an opportunity. You said that you might be the kingmaker. Are you saying that you might go with National? Is that a possibility?
No, we've ruled out going with National. Both our party leaders have said we will not be going with National. They are racist, so we won't be going with them.
All due respect, doesn't matter which party is, you've got to be in government, you've got to negotiate your deals. And, I'm hearing Māori policies, the cost things, but the reality is when you get into that place, you've got to be at the seat of government to make those choices and push really hard for the gains for our people.
I think if we reflect back to that, the Health and Disabilities Expert Review Panel, there are four of the 6 members in there wanted a separate Māori Health Authority, but we're still not, it doesn't look like we're going to get that. So, how difficult it is it when you are actually in government to get outcomes for Māori?
So if you read the report, we do support the establishment of a Māori Health Authority.
Without funding.
Those decisions are still yet to be made, Mihi, because the report's only just come out. But if you read it closely, what captures me, and I support it, is the fact that when it comes to implementation, half the senior staff have to be Māori. So that's the bit that people don't talk about, and it's in the report.
One thing that COVID has taught us is that actually things can move really fast when the government decides it wants to. All of those laws that got passed through really, really quickly, all those things happen. It's been a few months since the Māori expert panel came up with all of those recommendations.
I think
we can roll it whenever the government's ready to.
Tēnā koutou, kia mautonu mai rā te tiro ka hui anō a konei. Tahuti mai anō, you're watching the Hui Pōti 2020, where three wāhine toa are contesting the Ikaroa-Rāwhiti Electorate. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Heather. The Māori Party would commit to $100 million for a Māori sports authority. How would it work? What would it look like?
So it would include regional governors, so we'll have regional governors come onto the board. But the crux of it, Mihi, is that our whānau, we have the likes of George Napier, a standout All Black. He made the field. Many of our Māori tamariki and rangatahi don't make that field. So we're wanting to eliminate the barriers. Well, we want to create equality. Equality leads to equity, and currently we don't get equality through sports.
Meka, I'm going to come to you. This as an athlete, just like Heather there, this is totally your kaupapa.
Many years ago.
Sports and Recreation received $264 million in this year's budget. You know, how do you measure the spend on Māori sports or just Māori individually?
You know, that's a great story, and that's something that we continuously strive for, to ensure that Māori get a share of that pie. I do know that the Minister of Sport, you know, made an announcement about women in sport, and that should be applauded. But like I said, there's more work to be done. We're a sporting nation. We're sporting people. In the Tairawhiti, Kahungunu, we've had some amazing representation. But for our government, we've seen also the importance of getting our tamariki mokopuna into sport, and so, you know, dropping donations, investing in schools, getting our kids participating is where we see it. But in terms of an authority, I mean, I'd be interested to see the figures around it. It's a good kaupapa, but right now I think there's some issues around jobs.
Was it difficult for you to source funding when you were competing?
Different time in the 80s, to be honest.
Yeah, but difficult.
We didn't ban smoking and alcohol sponsorship, so it is a difficult and challenging time for many of our whānau just to get on the fields, just to pay the costs. And so, you know, I want our people active, I want them healthy, but right now with COVID, we've got to make sure that we're coming out this and preserving jobs.
You know, we're talking about sports on the field, we're talking about tamariki and our whānau, but, you know, sports is also about administration and boards and people who run those sports and the different codes, and it's big business, really. So of the 9 directors making up Sports NZ, which is the current organisation that receives the government funds, just one is Māori, Farah Palmer. So I guess Elizabeth, how can Māori trust that the dollar is being divided fairly?
It seems like if we wanted to make sure of that, their Māori needed to be involved in the decision-making long before that board was appointed. Is she also the only woman, or are there at least some other women on that board?
There's other women. There's other women.
It's good news. When Māori end up coming into a place where those major decisions are made, structures have already been created, then all we can do then is lobby, because I've got 2 sports. Whenever that was, because I was never a sports person, but I was in sports management for many years. And so when I'm looking at how they're organising themselves, I was like, how much funding is for the top echelon of any particular sport, and how much is actually filtering down to look after our coaches, to look after our scorers, our managers, our parents that come just to make sure the kids have something to eat afterwards and get their rides home. How much is actually coming down to our whānau? And so I guess we need to see how it's working, and where are the points where we can come in, have a say and make a difference.
What we know is that the money goes from Sport New Zealand down to regional sporting bodies that don't prioritise Māori sport. And then they may end up in the regional sporting codes or not, but usually they're in the codes that Māori aren't representing or highly populated in. This fund will ensure that that money goes directly to our Māori tamariki and rangatahi that will be the next George Napiers and so on.
So where would the money come from? Would it come from Sports New Zealand, and would others miss out?
No, the government committed a COVID recovery fund, and it would come through there.
And so when you consider organisations like New Zealand Rugby or New Zealand Netball or New Zealand Rugby League, who have really high percentages of Māori who play sports in there, how would the new Māori Sporting Authority represent them?
Yeah, we'll have governors on that board, and they'll be all Māori, which is the great thing, is that non-Māori won't be making decisions for Māori. So yeah, we'll have representatives from different sporting codes on that board.
I think it's also to acknowledge that a lot of Māori sports people go to where they get the best coaching and the best opportunities, and so, you know, I'm proud of the Māori that make it to national level. some of us have made it to national level, and we've got there on the smell of an oily rag.
I guess that's the point. Why should we get there on the smell of an oily rag? And why should, there be centres for excellence in rowing and yachting and all these kinds of sports where, actually kids from Kaiti can't really play those sports because it's too expensive.
When you win, Mihi, it's the most amazing feature.
No, I realise that, but why can't we have more?
I'm not saying they shouldn't have more.
So it's a good idea. Would it be something that you'd be able to work with?
What happens, Mihi, is that the coaches of those teams usually pull out of their pocket through true grit and determination for their whānau, all the kaumātua that can't afford to, that already don't have enough money to survive. They're the ones that are pulling the money out of their pocket, while horse racing New Zealand gets $78 million.
Fair point.
Look, I agree that our young people need to participate, which is why I mentioned, investing in our schools, removing donations, free lunches in school are all a way to contribute to our young people participating. But it's also acknowledging that we've got an employment package, the 200 million around free apprenticeships. We should be adding jobs around the management, the officials of sports, because that's going to create opportunities.
Ka pai, they've got to get in there first. The next month, over the next month, about 10,000 workers will be needed to pick about $1 billion worth of fruit, and that's just in the Hawke's Bay. How do we turn this into a win-win situation, Elizabeth, where we've got this growing unemployment rate of Māori?
We need to make sure that people know these opportunities are available, but also be talking with those predominantly young people, but a range of ages, to find out what it is they actually want to do in terms of with their life, how they want to create income. Because for some people, this will be a holiday job. It's something they'll do as a short-term measure. For other people, that's what they'll be doing for a very long time.
Is that the problem, though, that they're seasonal workers and there's not much afterwards?
I think that is a really key problem. I was involved in helping set up a youth centre, Toltol Village in Gisborne, and they run an employment program. And we have young people come in and they're saying, OK, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, but I'll take this opportunity because that's all I have. But looking at what other training you could wrap around for what it is they want to do in the future.
You're from the Hawke's Bay, so what do businesses need to do is it more flexible hours? Is it increased wages? I don't know, what is it?
We have an incomes policy, but I need to take it back a bit, Mihi, is we want to be aspirational Māori. We don't want to be just put aside for the seasonal apple picking jobs. We want aspirational jobs, and so our Māori Party incomes policy is raising the minimum wage benefit to minimum wage to $25. If we truly want to bring our whānau out of poverty, we need to be able to give them an income that they can afford to live in this world. At the moment, they're not being able to afford to live.
That's not going to solve the problem.
Aspiration is good, but for a lot of Māori people, it's about putting food on the table. So Labour...
Do you see this as a win-win situation? And what is the current government doing to help these newly unemployed get into these seasonal jobs?
Like I said, Mihi, we've got a $200 million Māori employment package that was part of the COVID Relief Fund, and that's around free apprenticeships. It's around returning the Māori apprenticeships. It's returning cadetships, and it's opening and working with Māori organisations and providers to create those opportunities. On top of that, we also had early on the Māori business owners in Gisborne. The wage subsidy made a big difference for a lot of small Māori businesses. But like I said, these are starts. This is what Labour has to offer. We too are raising the minimum wage to $20 next year, on top of all the other economic policies like the procurement policy that I'm sure I'll get to touch on later.
What are some of the job wins on the coast?
So clearly we've had, the Forestry is one of our biggest employers, which is why ensuring that that whole industry plants the right tree in the right time, but at the same time we've got to recognise they actually put a lot of kai on a lot of our people's tables. So we've got to treat the forestry industry with a balanced view. Can't get away with planting wrong trees, and we see slash in the rivers, but we've got to also make sure that they're looking after the workers. So forestry is one. Of course we've got growers in Gisborne, but I too want to see a digital industry, particularly with our rangatahi, and that's what's happening in Gisborne right now.
Ka pai, mā taki tōne mai, I'll be back with the aunties after the break. Tahuti mai anō. Well, last year Ikaroa-Rāwhiti observed 250 years since the arrival of Cook, and since that time Māori have been fighting to assert their sovereignty. So let's take a look at our next question.
Tēnā koutou ko tēnā ngata tōku ingoa hu uri tēnei no Ngāti Porou kei Tūranganui ā-Kiwa a wau ko tēnei taku pātai. So the government derives its right to govern through the treaty, but the Waitangi Tribunal has never been afforded any teeth by this government. If it matters enough to run a government off, it should matter enough to have some teeth. And 2021 is the year that's been mooted for us to have a national conversation about giving it some teeth through treaty-centred constitutional reform. I want to know what's your party's commitment to supporting treaty-centred constitutional reform in 2021 and the years that follow.
Kia ora, Heather.
Kia ora. So, you know, COVID was a pandemic that we're all dealing with. So there's two types of pandemics at the moment. One's COVID and one is racism. Racism is intentional. So we talk about constitutional reform. It needs to happen. We need to devolve government services for Māori, to Māori, by Māori. Yeah, it's, you know, and we talk about constitutional reform needs to happen because Māori aren't getting their rights and interest under Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Us three can stand and we can go into government and we can try and get the crumbs that we've always got for Māori. Constitutional reform will mean that devolution of services go back to iwi, hapu and Māori communities.
Ka pai. And Elizabeth, what's your party's position?
Green Party are known for being the only political party that took part in the Mātige Mai consultations. And in our policy, we talk about constitutional transformation, that a new constitution is in place by 2040, that we implement all of the recommendations of the Mātige Mai Aotearoa report, and that we actually start next year a nationwide conversation, because we still have to take our non-Māori people along with us.
I'm just going to let Meka respond to that.
Well, I actually was working for the iwi when the iwi Forum made that decision back in 2010 to do this piece of work, and I want to acknowledge Professor Margaret Mutu and our very own Moana Jackson, who led that initial work. Of course, Labour's up for the conversation. We should be having a conversation around our future, but it involves all New Zealanders. But Māori need to play a critical part. I'd like to see some start in the government departments, in our SOEs, in all parts of our society, about the importance of what the treaty means, not just the principle, but what promises were made by Māori and Pākehā for us to thrive in this country. So that when we have that conversation, Mihi, after we've done that, then we turn to constitutional reform, we'll talk to each other as opposed to talking past each other.
You're the government though, so are we on track?
So, like I said, we welcome, Labour's up for the difficult conversations. Since we've been in government, we don't shy away from those difficult conversations. We welcome the work that this group has done, and we will participate in those conversations. But we're going to involve the whole nation.
But are you organising this national conversation? Is it in the throes of happening?
I'm sure both Minister Andrew Little as Treaty Minister and Calvin Davis as the Crown Māori relationship have got the work underway to have those conversations, and we welcome that.
Just quickly.
See, there's the problem, Mihi, is we're having discussions. We don't want to have discussions. We've been talked to for years, 180 years, and we have a minister that is a Pākehā who is the treaty negotiator.
How would you have the constitutional conversation then if it wasn't to be?
It needs to be led by iwi and hapu, not by the government. Our sole priority is to give resource to whānau, not to decide how they're going to do things or tell them what to do. Our one job when we go to government is to get the resource. It's not to tell people how to do it and what to do it.
This is an independent report led by iwi leaders. It does require the other treaty partner to be at the table, hence the reason we're up for the discussion, and when we do have that, let's talk to each other, not past each other.
And these are going to be tough conversations though, because very few governments across the entire world are willing to give up power, which is what will be required here.
I'm going to go to welfare. The welfare reform was a bottom line for the Green Party in 2017, but this government ignored most of the recommendations. What has that meant for whānau on the benefit?
Well, we made progress on everything that was in our agreement, and we've learnt a lot. I think we can be honest and say that we're a bit naive, first time for the Greens in government, and we'll be in a different position this time. It was the Greens that got through the 25...
So you're disappointed with the result?
Oh no, I think we've had great successes.
In terms of welfare reform?
Not in terms of welfare, we've had movement. And when you're MPs in a confidence and supply situation, we've been pretty impressed with what we've done in terms of climate change, in terms of conservation, and many other areas. But this is one where we think it's really important that people understand you need the Greens in there for us to keep pushing.
Just a handful of changes where, you know, there were 42 recommendations from an expert panel. Why has it been so slow?
So if we look at the state we're in, Mihi, we didn't get there in 3 years, but we're committed as a government to do something about it. So one of our first steps we did was we stopped the tax cut.
We just borrowed $50 billion for COVID, so, you know, it's just financial, isn't it, the changes?
So obviously we've got to help the economy come out. We are looking...
These were prior to COVID, these recommendations.
So the welfare package, the family package that was announced when in our first couple of months was a nod to how a lot of our beneficiaries were doing it hard. We're still committed to doing that in terms of the social housing, the education, the employment, because we want our people out of welfare. You know, this is where I agree with Heather. We want our people to be aspirational. We want our people to be leaders and managers and owners of businesses. But the reality is, for many of our families, we don't have that luxury. So we've got to make sure that we've got safety nets, wraparound support. I mean, the whānau order contribution by this government is records of any governments, including the one that started it. So these are what Labour policies are, and
I'm going to come to you
soon,
Heather, but I just want to ask, are you comfortable with the plans to charge families in emergency housing 25% of their income, which is about to change after the election?
No, not at all. I mean, we want to make sure that our families are protected and, you know, they have a step ladder out of poverty, and that's what the Labour policies are around getting our people out of poverty. But like I said, it's taken decades to get them there. We can't turn it around in 3 years.
Ka whai. Heather, how would the Māori Party deal with welfare reform and benefits?
Well, our incomes policy has just been released, and we are going to double benefit baselines. We're going to double student allowance baselines, because we know that our whānau are struggling. And what the COVID did was it proved that those that were working could not afford to become unemployed, because the government doubled their rate of benefit compared to those that were on a benefit during pre-COVID and during COVID. That's unfair. That is what it's saying is working people matter and people that are on benefits don't. We were all in COVID together.
And what would you do with the COVID allowance? What would you do with the COVID allowance? Dissolve it? Would it go, and would people just go onto a benefit?
Are you talking about the
COVID response, the employment, the 490 versus the benefit?
Yeah, no, I think it needs to stay. We can't devolve it, because people are used to getting a certain amount of money, unemployed, and they need to be able to live.
Elizabeth, it must be distressing for you being, you know, the Green Party being in a government where, you know, you fought for welfare reform and for the underdogs and those on the benefit, and in the end you have a two-tiered benefit system.
We were proud of that we got some movement so that the $25 base rate increase would be made permanent. That was great. But yes, there are some things that we tried to push for we couldn't get. And our poverty action plan is then come up with a whole range of ways of a guaranteed minimum income for people, turning ACC into a place of actually comprehensive care, so that we shift, especially health-related and people with disabilities, and their benefits get taken and dealt with as the health matters that they are, and start to break down the whole way that we look at beneficiaries, the punitive and stigmatising that happens for people who are on benefits. And what I've seen a lot of during COVID is the prioritising of people who already had jobs, who then lose them. Somehow those, and that loss is bad. We need to do what we can to help our whānau in every situation, but that's worse than people who didn't have a job in the first place.
Ikaroa-Rāwhiti has the highest benefit dependency of all the seats. You know, what do you tell voters about having a two-tiered benefit system? You know, when you're giving newly unemployed almost twice the benefit.
What I tell them, in all honesty, Mihi, is about our employment, our Māori employment package, our free training, our apprenticeships, you know, the return of cadetship. So to try and get our people out of poverty and off benefits is by creating those opportunities. The government can't do it. We're investing in it. That's what the 200 million is. But we've got to work alongside our iwi, our providers, our council.
Are you comfortable having two benefits for unemployed people?
Look,
one for $4.90 and one for $2.50 or whatever it is.
So like I said,
and the $4.91,
focusing on
and the $4.91 you're three times likely Pākehā to have it than Māori. So you know, in effect, it's punishing those on benefits.
The government has obviously identified
focusing on jobs is the way we're going to deal with the disparities that we currently have.
So you're not.
I'm just focusing on what's needed in the electorate and the
ignoring
jobs.
the two-tier benefit.
No, just confronting them.
And what about the solo mums? What about the people on the job seeker who are getting, you know, a pittance compared to the $4.90?
So he potama rangatahi, mana and mahi Labour government policies, which is geared towards getting our people into the workforce. Now, whether it's part-time for solo mothers, or whether it's full-time for rangatahi, or whether it's people that have lost their jobs through COVID, there is a commitment by this government to ensure that.
But they don't get the COVID benefit, that's the point. We will come back.
Some have, Mihi, not all Māori don't get it.
If I can just quickly chime in. We're saying, and I don't disagree, we need to get whānau and trade trainings, but we're saying we're taking them off the benefit into trade training. That means that they're going to get a training benefit. So the Māori Party are committed to doubling the training benefit.
Kapo, stay with us. This debate's going to be tougher than a Wainui o Mata League final. Auraki mai anō. Time for our next question from the Ikaroa-Rāwhiti Electorate. Kia tahuira ki tātou.
Kia ora, my name is Rahia Tumutumu. I live here in Gisborne. I work in radio at Tūranga FM. In the Māori Media Review, one of the options was one national radio service to serve all iwi throughout the country. That doesn't sit well with us here in Te Tai Rāwhiti. My question to you is, what are you going to do to ensure reo iwi remains a priority on the airways?
Kia ora Rahia. Kia koe, Heather?
Yeah, I think it needs to stay. And what I have to ask is why, when they did the review, why didn't they go to iwi Māori radio stations and ask them what they thought instead of getting somebody else to come up with the decision to make that? And they need more money invested. When I went up and down the coast, and especially Radio Ngāti Porou, I was told that that was their means of contact to their whānau during COVID. That's important. If we wipe them out, how do our whānau stay connected? Everything goes on Māori iwi radio, everything.
Don't we have an obligation, Elizabeth, to iwi radio?
Oh, absolutely. We want to support a thriving media industry that's independent, that supports our journalists, but iwi radio in particular, I believe in the mana motuhake of our iwi to have and be able to run and organise themselves and how we want to communicate out to our people. Shout out to Tūranga FM. And we also we want to make sure then that those radio stations are properly funded according to their non-Māori equivalents.
Well, the government gave $50 million to mainstream broadcasters post-COVID. The 21 Māori radio stations survive on just $14 million a year, $500 a station. How is that fair and equitable?
So I just want to first acknowledge the work of the iwi radio stations, Mihi, and to answer Raiha's question around what are we going to do. Well, one of the ways I want to encourage them is have their say. There's been no decisions on the Māori medium proposal. That's up for grabs. That's out there and people can have the say. So that's what we need to do, and that's what I'm encouraging Raiha to actually have a say. Māori iwi radio stations, I've supported them from the time I was in Parakura's office, and we came here in 2003 when we opened Māori television. They do some amazing work, and they particularly did some amazing work during COVID. And so all those iwi radio stations...
You say everyone says they support them, but do they really? Because they're still getting $500,000 a year to run a station. Well, if we supported them, wouldn't we give them more money?
Of course, and I do believe they are getting money. If you go through some of our stations, particularly up at Radio Ngāti Porou, I mean, they've got a brand new studio, they've got a bit at the back. And I'm not saying that's all come from the government. There is investment going into the radio station. The question you're saying, and I agree, is it enough? No, and I've said so publicly, we need more money towards iwi radios.
When you consider, you know, that they're the hub of the community, often, you know, that's just the hangout, and they do the COVID responses, they do the health and the hauora and those kinds of things. Can you see like a relationship between jobs, training and iwi radio station?
Absolutely. The Māori Party's education policy says that we will fund digital devices for tamariki from years 4 to 13, as well as provide free internet for them. That means that they can stay in touch with whānau. They can go into radio stations, but the question really should be, Mihi, is why are we having this conversation before the conversation was had with those radio stations? Co-design is such a crap word. There's no such thing as co-design.
Elizabeth, how do we ensure equity and equality across broadcasting?
It's a decision. It's a political decision. Successive governments have gotten away with always substantially underfunding Māori organisations and services.
Kapai, I want to go to the PGF now because I've been having a look around in each of the electorates. In Te Rawhiti, $208 million has been allocated from the PGF. Half of that's been spent on roads. What about jobs and training?
We've got, well, I've mentioned earlier in this segment, $200 million Māori employment package, which is part of the COVID response. Again, that's around returning cadetships, that's around free apprenticeships, there's the Māori trade training, the training allowance we've also going to reintroduce if we get back into government. These are all initiatives. And like He Rangatahi Pautama and Mana and Mahi, these are Willie Jackson's policies, and look, they are working in Tai Rawhiti, they are working in Ikaroa-Rāwhiti. More young people engaging, almost...
I guess when you look at the weighting of the PGF funding, because it was for an injection into those rural and regional areas to get businesses and unemployment and all those things going, you look at the 105 million roading repairs versus the 13 million on training and jobs, and it kind of suggests that roads are more important than people.
Look, we welcome the Tai Rawhiti roading package because we actually need that in State Highway 35 because that's where most of our forests are. And so we've got to get them off the coast, to get them to the port, to get them out. So if it's about our local economy, and that's why investing in major infrastructure, also in rebuilding our airport. We're one of the few regional airports that we require to bring in tourists and also to remove goods and services out. And one day we may have the rail back online. That's another big issue. But what I'm saying is you've got to have infrastructure to grow their local economy. On top of that, you've got to invest in people. And the 5-point plan that Labor is presenting this election will do that.
How do you
I don't believe that was Minister Jackson's work. He Kaikaia Akuringa was the first that talked about the PGF fund. Peter Sharples, Debbie Ngāre Wapeka and Ngāhiwi Tamona, they led He Kaikaia Akuringa, so I have to, sorry Meka, reject the comment
so
that belonged to.
Claiming the...
Absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, the first, I think the first money to land in Kahungunu was the airport. And when I spoke to people about that had been applying for the PGF fund, it was unapplicable. You couldn't apply. You had to go through so many hoops. You know, the airport
So how do you make it more equitable? How do you make it fairer, the PGF fund?
We honour te tiriti. we honour te tiriti. Every government decision that comes out of government needs to be treaty compliant, te tiriti compliant, and if it's not, it should not go forward.
Elizabeth, do we need to measure things? Do we need to measure things, you know, better so that we know exactly where the dollar are going? You know, we have all these millions that we're throwing out into the regions, but what are Māori really benefiting from?
Exactly, and I think we have to really look at what are not just the measures of what is actually happening and what's been approved, but the framework that we're looking at it inside of. Is the infrastructure you're creating going to mitigate against climate change? Are you going to create something that's just going to cause more damage to Papatūānuku, or actually is it going to support it and help it? So I would say actually it'd be really good to, rather than get Highway 35 up to a good standard so that it takes longer before the logging trucks destroy it again and it has to be done over again, that actually let's look at what is it going to take to get the rail to Gisborne and up the coast.
I mean, all due respect, I mean, you can write reports, but unless you're around the government tables advocating for resources, you don't get any change. And that's why I'm saying our policies around investing in our people, the $1.4 billion in the last 2 budgets is record investment, Māori-specific funding. That's in addition to universal funding. So I know our people are benefiting, but like I said, it's a beginning, it's not the end.
And
you talk about how forestry needs those roads, but also whānau need those roads up the coast. So how do you balance that, the safety of whānau and, you know, obviously the jobs and all those kinds of things? Is a railway a possibility?
It's something that's advocated locally, but at this point in time we've got the railways far to Wairoa from Napier. Fingers crossed we may get it to Gisborne, and clearly there's some issues locally that want it to go up the coast.
Mahi, I drove up the coast last week, and actually the road that the railway track that links Wairoa to Gisborne, the road has been covered. There's no track that now links us when you go up that big hill to Wairoa. It's been filled in.
Mistake?
No. So it's the rail line to Wairoa, not north of Wairoa.
Right. Ka pai. It's getting hotter than a Tokomaru Bay shearing shed, so stay with us, whānau. After the break, we asked the koka who would be their choice for a statue of significance in Ikaroa-Rāwhiti. Hoki mai anō. Well, slash, or the forestry industry's runoff is polluting East Coast communities. I can't imagine the good people of Takapuna putting up with this behaviour. So why on earth does Tolaga Bay have to deal with it?
So 2 days after the Tolaga Bay floods, I was there meeting with locals up in the air, brought the Civil Defence Minister at the time, Chris Whawhoi, and we flew over. So I got to see firsthand the slash and the damage it done to our waterways, not to mention the farming lands as well as the community. And so it was clear that our practising of where we plant trees and while we plant trees there need to change. And so meeting with all the contractors, and there's few forestry contractors in in Gisborne immediately after was to put them on notice that, one, they had to help clean up, two, we're going to change the national policy statement on where we plant trees. That's what this government does. Who implements and monitors the forestries and where they plant is actually Gisborne District Council. So we've got to work alongside them with those companies. Can I say in the recent floods, ups to those companies, because they turned out without having to be dragged to clean up the beach lines around Tolaga Bay. But it's still an ongoing issue around leaving too much slash. That's something that we are working on with the industry to get the logs they don't want off the mountainsides because of the damage they're causing.
Should we even have to drag them out to clean up the slash, Elizabeth?
When our children make a mess, and we shouldn't have to thank them that they think that they should clean up after themselves, and they're fully functioning adults and running businesses, making a lot of money on our people.
Can you explain to us what the damage is to the environment from this behaviour?
First is the wanton disregard of the damage that's being caused. The fact that council doesn't seem like they have the power to enforce the compliance for the permits they have issued. So there's a whole lot of structural things that need to be sorted out. But I mean, when we have so much slash coming down through our rivers, it clogs the rivers, it contributes to flooding, but it also damages, some of our iwi and our whānau have done planting. Our farmers who are working really hard to be more sustainable in their practices, and then this just comes down and it wipes it all out, and then it just comes through. So things like you can't fish in those rivers, you can't swim in those rivers, and there are whole ways of life that are being removed from our whānau.
It's an industry, though, that provides so many jobs for people up the coast. So, I mean, it's a fine balance, isn't it? What do you do?
Well, it is, Mihi, but we need to go back to, as Meka said, ngā ture. Why did we let this happen prior? We talk about everywhere we go, when we mihi or we whakatau, we talk about ranginui and papatuanuku. Papatuanuku is left in disarray. Not only that, that slash goes into our rivers. Those rivers are our intergenerational whakapapa, our eels, our wildlife that are in those rivers. But also, it's grating away our whenua. As it goes along, it's changing our landscapes of our whenua. So if we are really committed to ranginui and papatuanuku, then let's make sure that any infrastructure that the government stand up, that the mana whenua are there to enhance te mana o te wai, te mana o te whenua, te mana o te moana, and protect the interests and the rights and interests of our wāhi tapu.
Would you penalise them?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Elizabeth?
We've been penalised, Mihi,
Yeah,
we've been penalised.
People should take responsibility for the harm they're causing.
Mihi, as the Associate Minister of Forestry, I was actually promoting native planting. Native and permanent forests, which is better for the coast because we've got quite erosional land up there, which means doesn't matter what you put in, you pull out, in a heavy rain, it's gone. And so changing the way we plant and looking at how we sink permanent forest and using natives, I think.
But these are big businesses, so, do we need to give them harsher penalties?
No, the national policy statement on where they plant and how they plant needs to also be coupled with how we harvest the trees, because they are picking and choosing which pieces to take away and which pieces to leave behind. We've got to stop that practice or come up with an alternative to get that waste off the mountain.
The bigger picture here too, though, is about the power of our iwi and hapu, especially to have mana over our own wai. So, for example, in the port in Gisborne, underneath the harbour is the nursery which feeds the entire East Cape and all the way around to the Bay of Plenty. And with the port wanting to expand, that would absolutely cause damage to that. And so we've got Ngāti Onione, one of the smallest little iwi in our Turanga area, negotiating, trying to have those relationships.
I think we need like an hour for the mana o te wai kōrero, so I'm going to leave that one there. We're going to go to referendums because people want to know how you're going to vote. So the cannabis, should we legalise cannabis? Meka, yes, no, and why?
Yes, 3 reasons. Economically, it's creating jobs in my electorate, particularly up the coast. 2, justice. We've got too many people in our prisons and on remand for possession of cannabis. 3rd, health. Despite the reports around the taking of drugs, I support the use of drugs when you've got chronic pain, and we don't all have to smoke it. You can actually have a cannabis rub. So I'll be supporting yes.
Kia ora, Elizabeth.
Yes, for actually very many of those reasons. Definitely for it's a good to not have our young people starting a life heading towards prison because of possession, that we can actually have some of our people who've got skills in this area becoming entrepreneurs. And so I think that, and particularly for health, we've worked with whānau who have been suffering for cancer or not been able to get the treatments that they know, and that's something that has given them ease. But we need to be able to control it, have good safeguards in place.
Ka pai. Heather.
Yes, to decriminalise. And the answer to say yes just straight away, the Māori Party needs to be in there to ensure that all the braces and belts are put in place. We have a very heavy mental health problem at the moment, currently. We don't have enough services to provide for the current mental health of what we're dealing with now. If we legalise it, we need to ensure that we make sure we have kaupapa Māori models of health to deal with whānau that may get into the mental health space from smoking cannabis.
Ka pai, staying with you on euthanasia, yes or no, and why?
When we get up on the marae, te honga ora ki te honga ora, te honga mate ki te honga mate. Nā te atua, te timatanga, nā te atua hoki te whakamutunga. So no, no.
Ka pai. Elizabeth.
Yes, I support the right of our kuia kaumātua and those who, because of the nature of their health conditions, to be able to make choices and have dignity about the way that their life ends.
Tēnā koe, Meka.
As a conscious vote and as the co-chair of the Māori caucus, we got the pros and cons in front of Māori caucus. We heard both sides and ultimately I sided on the no because I think life is too precious.
Ka pai. Well, I've come to a new area of our debate, and I'm going to ask you all, and I've asked you before, so I hope you've considered it. If if you were considering somebody special, a rangatira, a tangata rongonui from Ikaroa-Rāwhiti to be made into a statue or a memorial of some kind, who would it be and why, Meka?
I would say my mother, but that one's taken.
Oh, hi, Meka.
Anyone else?
No, seriously, we've got some amazing leaders. It'll be hard to point one out. We've got strong leaders throughout Ikaroa-Rāwhiti, for Tairawhiti, Ngāti Kahungunu. It'd be unfair to put one out, but if I had to really push, I'd go with someone like Noinoi Pewharangi or Tuini Ngāwai, strong Māori wāhine that only we could aspire to be like.
Tēnā koe mō tēnā. If you didn't know, we were talking about Pani of the Reef there. Elizabeth, who might yours be?
One of our main tupuna for Titirangi, or what they call Kaiti Hill, is Hamoterangi, and she's the mother of all of Ngāti Porou and all of Kaitahu. So I don't want to say, I might, that they're all Ngāti Oneone, but they all have originate from where we're from, and so, and the other ways that we have memorialised or our people is through artwork. We don't need a statue of a person. We are more gifted and more creative than that.
Ka pai.
I would say Ranginui and Papatūānuku and all our Māori atua, because that's where we derive our energy source from, and it will create discussion and it will hold on to history, pūrako, that we have had for since the beginning of time, so it will create discussion.
There's an idea that Matariki might be made into a public holiday, and I wondered, what are your thoughts around making Ikaroa-Rāwhiti the home place for Matariki?
First place to see the sun.
Apparently. Good
Makes
idea?
sense. Makes sense.
Makes sense.
But Mihi, you've got to also realise that some iwi have been practising matariki for many years, and our own iwi, Hiranzai iwi of Ngāti Kahungunu, have been doing it annually for the last 13, 14 years. So for some iwi in our electorate, it's not new, but we celebrate it nonetheless.
Would you like it to be the home of matariki?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Be good for tourism?
Oh, and
local
just be
tourism,
good
that is.
Local tourism.
Ka pai, ka nui tērā mōkuri anō kia riri ngā mihi whakawhitai ki ngā kaitono I tēnei pō Meka. Heather, Elizabeth, aku mare kura tēnā koutou. Thank you for your time this evening. Now make sure you log on next Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock for our Tai Tokero debate. And remember folks, if you're not enrolled to vote, you still can. You do that online at vote.nz. Ko hikina te hui, noho ramaira.
toko nā te maanga.
The hui is made with support from New Zealand On Air.